Alright, you guys, so we have been talking about Jamestown and Plymouth, and we've been reviewing the last couple of days about the climate and geography in Jamestown and Plymouth. So today we're going to talk about the survival that these men and the families had to go through in Jamestown and Plymouth in order to survive. So, who can remind me what the climate was in Jamestown? Landon?
It was
Really hot and humid, yes. So, what Miss Prosser just passed out to you guys is a passage that we're going to read together today and a graphic organizer that we're also going to fill out together based on what we read in the passage. Who can remind me how the geography of Jamestown was? Like, how was the soil and Jaden?
The geography in Jamestown was very rich. There was rich soil, and there was a lot of soil to grow tobacco.
Yes, so Jaden said that the soil was very rich and they were able to grow tobacco. That's a great answer. All right, so let me go ahead and start reading this, and you guys can follow along on your sheet. By mid-May 1607, the early Jamestown settlers realized that weather in their new land was very different than weather in England, their homeland. Summer in England had little humidity and few bugs. Summer in Jamestown, with tropical humidity and oppressively high temperatures, bred mosquitoes and biting flies. And winters, as settlers soon discovered, were as cold as the summers were hot. So what did the heat and the humidity bring? Maddie?
It brought red mosquitoes and biting flies.
Yes, and what did those mosquitoes and bugs bring to the people? Yes. Diseases, yes. Okay, so let's continue. Settlers for the longest time could not understand the climate. Yes?
The heat also brought heat strokes and heat waves.
Yes, it did.
So a lot of people fainted.
Settlers for the longest time could not understand the climate of their region. They did not know how to grow crops that they could bring from England on these new lands. Some Native Americans had described the area around Jamestown as waste ground because they knew that it was difficult to find fresh water here. Unable to grow crops, the colonists started to run out of food and starvation set in. The colonists were so weakened from sickness, it was reported they could hardly stand. It was written that most died from famine, but the major killer was more likely polluted river water, full of slime and filth, which led to salt poisoning, dysentery, and typhoid. And those two are just like infections that they got from this. An epidemic swept the settlement and left half of the 104 men and boys dead before the end of September. Only about 50 survived as winter approached. The colony was on the brink of collapse. Instead of fighting with the weakened Englishmen, the Native Americans brought the colonists food and saved their life. In January 1608, 8 or 9 months after leaving Jamestown, Captain Newport returned with new immigrants. They discovered that only 38 of the original settlers had survived, and only 10 were physically able to work. So what does that say about their survival so far? Jaden?
It's really hard to survive, and a lot of them are disabled and not able to do things.
Yes, they lost way over half of their men. They lost over half of their men just as winter approached, and then we're down to only 38, and out of those 38, only 10 were healthy enough to work. So that means their survival was really hard out there. Yes, and yes? know they had a lot of disagreements, but I'm not sure that they were their slaves at this time. We're going to get to that, though. We're going to learn about that. By the summer of 1608, John Smith and Captain Newport were able to trade with the Native Americans. Enough corn for the colony to last through the rest of the winter and early spring. John Smith reported that the settlers built a block house at the entrance to the island, experimented with glass making, and planted 100 acres of corn. Conditions at this new Jamestown seemed to improve when Smith became president in September of 1608. In August of 1609, more than 300 new colonists, including women and children, arrived tired and hungry to the colony. At this time, a serious drought engulfed the area that caused sickness, disease, and malnutrition. The colony was brought to the brink of extinction. During the spring of 1613, the colonists and the Native Americans of the region finally came to an agreement. Both sides could now plant their corn, fish, hunt, and live in peace without the continual worry of attack. In April 1614, Pocahontas married John Rolfe, allowing the two peoples to pay proper attention to the abundance of the land. John Rolfe experimented with planting a new variety of tobacco, a mild Spanish leaf, which he anticipated would be more suited to English tastes than the bitter Native American variety. He had not only learned how to raise this new type of plant that was well suited to the climate and soils of the region, Rolfe also managed to develop a way to harvest and cure the tobacco so it could be transported to England without spoiling. After a couple of years, he met with great success and was busily marketing his crop among English merchants. Virginia colonists quickly gave up all other products to meet the demand for tobacco in England. Production increased phenomenally into the 1620s and became readily available for mass consumption in England. So, a few years after they got there was 300 new colonists, including their women and children, right? So, they probably expected to live a better life, but then what happened?
They died.
What happened?
They were on the brink of extinction.
Yeah, they're on the brink of extinction. And what caused that?
It's because of diseases and heat stroke.
Savannah?
The diseases and the heat stroke, like James said. Poisonous.
And if you look at that paragraph, it says a drought. A serious drought engulfed the area that caused sickness, diseases, and malnutrition. What does a drought mean? Maddie?
When there's not a lot of water for a very long time.
Yeah, when there's like limited water. And they already had water issues, right? It said that it was very polluted, and that caused a lot of the diseases as well. So when the drought happened, that made survival a lot harder, right? Yeah.
Is Jamestown near a desert?
It was like in a forest area. Yeah, foresty. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our graphic organizer. And let's talk about how the geography impacted the survival of the settlement in Jamestown. Landon? Yeah, the soil was very rich. But what else happened with the geography that made it like harder for them to grow the crops? I think it's in the second paragraph. Wyatt?
There wasn't much water.
Exactly, yes. There wasn't a lot of fresh water. It says the Native Americans had described the area around Jamestown as waste ground because it was difficult to find fresh water here. Without fresh water, was it hard for them to grow crops?
Yeah.
Yes. So let's go ahead and put that down. So known as a waste ground, difficult to find fresh water. And that made it harder to grow their crops. Since they were having a difficult time growing the crops, how did that impact their survival? Connor? It led to death. And how?
They couldn't eat or drink.
Yes, they couldn't eat, so it led to starvation. Jaden?
And the only water they had was polluted water, and it led to nutrition.
Yes, it led to sicknesses and diseases from the polluted water. So let's go ahead and write that down. Jasmine?
So how did they survive?
They built relationships with the Native Americans. So it said, during the spring of 1613, the colonists and Native Americans of the region finally came to an agreement. So how did the Native Americans help them survive? Jackson? Yep, they helped them learn how to grow the crops. Claire?
They got food.
They helped them find food. Landon?
They helped them adjust.
Yes, they helped them adjust and adapt to their new way of life there at Jamestown. Jaden?
They made an agreement for no attacks on each other, so that helped a lot of their lives.
Okay, yeah, and they traded with them, right? Vincent?
Did they have salt water to like them, or?
Well, they were by the ocean, so yes. Maddie?
They saved their lives.
They did. After they came to agreement, they helped them learn ways to survive. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is how the climate impacted survival. So it says, explain how the climate impacted the survival of the settlement at Jamestown. So who can tell me how the climate impacted survival? Um, Savannah? Uh, yeah.
Because it was too hot and they didn't, when they were working outside, they got overheated and they died.
Yes, it was really hot and humid, and people were dying from that. And what did the heat and humidity bring? Landon?
It brought mosquitoes and biting flies with like diseases.
Yes. So it brought the mosquitoes and the biting flies, and those brought the diseases. Savannah? Yeah.
I had another answer for climate.
Okay.
It's like the hot and humid weather led to a drought, which made them where they can't drink, so they
Yes.
died.
Yes. So what else did the drought bring? Carmen?
No one in probably some it's like disgusting and everybody they can't get sleep and have to drink leftover food.
Okay. Jaden, you want to add something?
You know like fish, right?
Uh-huh.
Most of the fish would be gone from like their livers and stuff. Streams. Yeah, because there's not enough water.
Okay, but how did the drought impact their survival? What did it bring that impacted their survival? Savannah?
It the drought made it have where it had no water, and they had to have water to survive, and they got so they didn't get any water, so they dehydrated, and it caused them.
And when we don't have water, we can't grow crops. And if we can't grow crops, then we can't eat. Okay, so let's go ahead and write those down because those are all really good points that we want to include. So we're putting hot and humid, the mosquitoes and biting flies that brought diseases. And then we're also going to put what Savannah has talked about the drought and how that brought sickness and disease as well as malnutrition. All right, so the third box says, how did the people at Jamestown adapt to the geography and climate, allowing them to survive? So what happened that was like a turning point that helped these people start to be able to survive? Yes.
They sided with the Native Americans.
Yes, they made an agreement with the Native Americans. And what did those Native Americans do to help them survive? Landon?
They would not attack them, and then they would help them with the crops.
Yes, they weren't afraid of the being attacked anymore, and they helped them learn how to grow crops. So we can go ahead and put that down. They lived in peace with the Native Americans. And what else did the Native Americans help them do other than grow crops? Carmen,
They give them fresh water.
they helped them find fresh. Okay. Um, Jaden.
They helped got them more land because they're sharing the land now.
Okay, that's a good one. Um, Vincent.
Fishing hook.
Yes, good job, Vincent. They taught them how to fish and hunt so they could live off of the resources that were available to them on the land, right? Because they didn't have grocery stores that they could just go and drive to get food or meat or whatever they needed at the time. So they needed to learn how to fish and how to hunt. And what was it's a special crop that they learned how to plant out there that helped them like build their economy and get money. Connor. Tobacco. So they taught them how to grow tobacco. So we're gonna put they grew corn. They fished and hunted. And they grew tobacco as a cash crop. All right, so Miss Prothero just passed out to you the Survival in Plymouth passage that we're going to read together. And we're also going to fill out a little graphic organizer on Plymouth as well. Jaden?
If you ate tobacco for lunch or something, would you get really sick?
Yes, that is not a crop that you want to eat. Definitely not. Vincent?
Chocolate, like Nutella, or chocolate?
Those things weren't invented yet. They couldn't go to the store and just go and buy some Nutella for their sandwiches. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over to Plymouth. And who can remind me how Plymouth's climate was different than Jamestown's climate? Jackson. Yes, so Plymouth had very, very cold winters and cool summers. And how was their geography different? How was their soil different than Jamestown? Jasmine? How was their soil and their geography different?
It was wet.
We said that Jamestown was super fertile and rich soil. Emma Claire, do you want to help Jasmine?
Sandy and stony.
Yes, very sandy, very stony. And that also made it hard for them to grow crops. So we're going to talk about survival in Plymouth, and this is where the Pilgrims came with their families and their children. So they were really hard workers. After the Speedwell was found to be unseaworthy, 102 pilgrims led by William Bradford crowded aboard the 106-foot-long Mayflower and set sail for America on September 6, 1620. After 2 difficult months at sea, land was sighted on November 9th off the coast of Cape Cod. Having sailed from the port of Plymouth in England, the Pilgrims decided to name their settlement Plymouth Colony. Battered by 2 major storms, the Pilgrims had to stay aboard the Mayflower, ferrying back and forth to shore while building shelters to house their new settlement. During the first winter, the Pilgrims were not able to grow enough food because of the extreme cold. This led to starvation and disease to run throughout the colony. In that first winter, 45 of 102 passengers died. Why did they die? Baylor? Yes. And why were they starving? Emma Claire? It's too cold for them to grow those crops. By March of 1621, the settlers finally settled at the location of Plymouth. The soil at Plymouth was very sandy and stony, which made it very difficult for the Pilgrims to grow crops that could produce enough food. Unlike the colonists at Jamestown, the Pilgrims developed good relations with the Native Americans. In the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims shared a harvest feast with the Native Americans of the region, known as the Poking Pits. This meal is now considered the first Thanksgiving dinner and is the basis for the Thanksgiving holiday. Over the next few years, the Native Americans helped teach the Pilgrims how to survive in the New World. Native Americans taught the Pilgrims how to plant corn in the sandy soil, which became an important crop, as well as where to fish and where to hunt beaver. The Pilgrims used the resources in the surrounding regions as sources of food that allowed them to survive. Though Plymouth would never develop as robust an economy as Jamestown, agriculture, fishing, and trading made the colony self-sufficient within 5 years after it was founded. So after reading that, what can we say helped the Pilgrims survive? Maddie? The Native Americans. And how did the Native Americans help them? Savannah?
They taught them how to grow corn, and I know how they taught them how to grow corn. They put fish in the soil.
Yes, so you remember that. We were talking about that the other day. Good job. So what else did the Native Americans help them do? There's a few other things they helped them do to survive. Vincent? Hunting. They taught them how to hunt beavers. What else?
Fishing?
Yes, and fishing. Good job. All right, so now we're going to get our Plymouth graphic organizer out. And extra, sorry. Thank you. Yes, Jasmine? You're what?
I don't really want to do that.
Your throat hurts? Do you need a drink of water?
No, I don't want to go.
Do you want to go ask the office for a water bottle? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our graphic organizer. And the first one says, explain how the geography impacted the survival of the settlement at Plymouth. So how did their geography impact their survival? Emma Claire?
So it was really cold, and it was farther than the top, so they starved.
Yeah, so that has to do with climate, because that would be like the weather. The coldness would be the weather. But what does the geography, how did that impact their survival? That would be like the soil. Savannah? Yes.
There was sandy and stony soil, so it wasn't good soil to grow crops.
Yes. So it was very sandy, stony soil that made it really difficult to grow the crops. So we're gonna go ahead and write that. Um, Sandy and stony soil made it very difficult to grow crops that produced food. So what happened since they weren't able to grow those crops? How did that impact their survival? Jaden?
They died of starvation and disease.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Um, Explain how the climate impacted the survival of the settlement at Plymouth. So this is where we're talking about the weather. Climate is regarding the weather. So how did their climate at Plymouth impact their survival? Landon?
Since it was really cold, we couldn't grow crops.
Yes. So the extreme coldness made it really difficult for them to have enough food for everyone. Um, so what did that do during the first winter?
It
How did that?
45 of the 102 passengers died.
Yes, so they lost about half of the people that they brought over there. So let's go ahead and write that down. We're going to put extreme cold made it difficult to grow enough food. And then we're also going to write down that about half of the colony died within the first winter. And that must have been so devastating for them. Could you imagine going to a new place and trying to learn how to survive, and you have, these families with their children and almost half of them die? Jaden?
Did the children work too, or only like the babies?
I'm sure they all had to. I'm sure they all had to do something. No, I'm sure the babies didn't have to work. Maddie, yes. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the last one, and it says, how did the people at Plymouth adapt to the geography and climate, allowing them to survive? Emma Claire.
When the Native Americans came, they taught the pilgrims how to like grow crops in the cold, which they like knew, so they did it.
Yes, so the Native Americans helped them learn how to plant the corn in the sandy and stony soil because they had lived there for longer and they had more experience with that, so they knew how to make enough food. So we can go ahead and write that down. So use Native American techniques to plant corn in the sandy soil. And what else did the Native Americans teach them that we talked about in this passage? Jaden?
The Thanksgiving feast, they taught them how to hunt and fish.
Yes, they taught them how to live off of the resources that were provided on the land. So they taught them how to fish and how to hunt beaver. So we're going to put that. They used resources that were found around the region, such as fish and beaver. When you guys are done writing all of that, you can go ahead and put the passages, the long passages that we read. These can go in your social studies pocket in your binder. And then get out your glue, and we're going to go ahead and glue both the Plymouth and the Jamestown graphic organizers into our social studies learning log. Connor?
Remember that video that we watched? Not the one like the program reenactment, not the one yesterday, but one like
When they were building the roofs?
Yeah, were those the Native Americans or the Indians? Because they didn't really look like they wanted to help them.
When they had all that face paint at the end?
Yeah, and then there was like a whole line of them. Remember when the girl told the guy, like, tapped him and told him to look over there, and there was like a whole line of people? The Indians, because the Indians are darker, remember?
So the Native Americans.
Yeah,
Well, you have to remember that they had conflict before, especially at Jamestown. There was a lot of conflict before they came to that agreement.
Yeah, totally.
So they weren't happy with each other at one point.
Yeah.
So did anyone have any other questions on this, how they survived? Yes, glue both of the graphic organizers into your social studies learning log. And then once you're done with that, you guys can go ahead and start packing up.
So they was like the Native.
Huh?
They was like the Native Americans at one point and the Native at the other.
No, they just had a lot of disagreements because
Oh, so they didn't have like war or like they didn't fight.
because remember the people in Jamestown, they came there and they were looking for gold and riches and land, right? So the Native Americans were already living there, and they were like, no, wait, we already live here. So there was a lot of conflict there.
I would have been mad because the Jamestown were trying to take the land, and the Native Americans were saying we can share it.
I agree. Carmen, did you have a question? Yes. Thank you. We're going to be looking for some quiet groups to go ahead and line up. So once you're done, let's pack up quietly and sit down in our chairs.